All right, so Streamlit, you guys played with that a little bit. It was super easy to use. ST right? You could do whatever to the screen. You could do charting. You could do all sorts of stuff. Now we're going to talk about Flask, and eventually we'll talk about Django. Those are the two most common web frameworks for Python. All right. There's a couple out there like Cherry Pie and some of those. They're all very, very similar to Flask or Django. Flask, to me personally, is kind of the basic. I want to build a web app and I just want to get it up and rolling. All right. I don't have a massive database. I don't have anything on the back end. I just want to get it up and going. Django is more of, this is probably a more sophisticated web app. I need a database backend. I need some more structure. There's going to be logging in, logging out, that kind of stuff. Probably go with Django on that. Not that you couldn't do it in Flask, but it would give you more in Django if you did it that way. So if we look out here to Flask, all right. And again, I don't use books in here because go out and use the documentation. It's the best place to go figure out how everything works. This is Flask itself will depend on a Jenga template, and we'll talk about that. That's how you build out your website or your web pages rather. And they all run as a WSGI. So you're going to have some kind of web server front end to host this long term. All right. There's a built-in development server, and I'll show you how we use this with PyCharm. But when you want to publicly display your project or something like that, you would go out and do that. Now, note when you click the link from Flask, right? I click documentation. This is taking me out to 2.2x. This is an old version. So make sure you go out to the 2.3x for what we're going to be using here on out. Okay. Matter of fact, I'm going to update that link right now on the video live. Edit. Usually they have a recent release, but evidently not for this one. Okay. So this will take you through there. It's going to take you through all the dependencies that you need, how to install it, how to set up virtual environments. PyCharm is going to handle all that for us, and then how you install Flask in there as well. You could do this from scratch. So if we started up a PyCharm example here. This is where you guys are going to need to, brush off, dust off your CSS, HTML skills. Very basic, don't have to get complicated, but this is the project you would use. Okay, so here is actually a simple Flask project that I built the other day, but let's go ahead and start a new one. So we go to new project. We could go pure Python. We could name it whatever we want. There is a Flask option over here on the left. All right. You guys are welcome to use that. What that's going to do is automatically set up a Flask section so you guys can start using Flask right off the bat. But if you wanted to code it from scratch, you would just use Python. Then you would go pip install Flask and add all the packages and then go from there. For this purpose, we're just going to grab Flask over here. We'll call it Flask tutorial. All right. Down here below, it's going to ask you what templating language you want to use. We're going to use Django 2. It's the default. And we want to put it in the templates folder. From there, we just need to create a new virtual environment. Same as any other thing we've ever done so far. Hit create. And we'll say this window. It will go off and create us a virtual environment. So while that does that, we're going to take a look at the quick start here. Okay. And then they have a whole tutorial. We are going to walk through that in this class because it is a very good tutorial on how to get started. We'll talk about templates, testing Flask options, setting up signals, all sorts of stuff. We can't cover every single piece of Flask. All right. Like that itself would take 8 weeks. Django itself would take 16 weeks. We're just going to cover the basics of how to do it, how to get it set up so that you guys can build some projects off of it. All right. Let's see here. APIs. Okay. So as that goes through, we'll look at this minimal code app. So this is all the lines of code you need to run a web application. You just say from Flask, import Flask. You set app equal to Flask __ name _ parenthesis on the side. And then you say at app.route, this SWAC, right? This means when I go to my IP address, 209.114, whatever my IP address is, at the main base, this is the page that's going to do it. It would run this function, def hello world, which in this case just creates a simple page that says hello world on it. All right. So we have to import our WYSIWYG and then we run it. To run the application, you have to use the keyword Flask --app, whatever the name of your application is. In this case, it's hello, right? That's just what this is called. And then run. At that point, it will run a local server on a 127.0.0.1 on port 5000, and it'll go ahead and load that up for you. We will see that same thing out here. So if we look at this one, they've automatically created this Hello World one for us. If we look at our project, by default, we're going to see a static folder, which has nothing in it, a templates folder, which has nothing in it, and then this app.py. All right, and this app.py is our main file that we're trying to run. So to run this, I can actually set it up here, the top. Just click on it up here. There we go. We can hit play, and that is going to run the equivalent of that Flask run and then whatever app name I have, right? That brings up this link. I click on the link and I have a little web application that says Hello World. Okay. Yes, sir.
Do you have to open that every time to see changes to your web page, or does it automatically update like as you save the file?
It will automatically update as you save it. Yep. So we can hit stop over here. If I wanted to run it from the command line, I'd go to terminal and I would type in Flask run app.py, hit enter, and it's going to go ahead and run that, right? Unexpected argument. It's run. That's not the right.
It's run --.
Yeah. Run. Yeah. Nope. I typed it wrong again. Flask run. It's going to run the local file inside of there. There you go. So Flask run, and it runs the app.py file that's already in there. Okay. So that's our name. Click on the link. We also get our hello world. So either way you guys want to do this in PyCharm, where you're starting from scratch, I would go ahead and just use this one up here at the top. It automatically runs it for you. Set some debug stuff, that kind of stuff in there. Okay. This would not be used for production. Do not use for production. To use a production WYSIWYG server instead, and I will show you guys how to do that. So this would be something like Nginx. You guys would load this program up, let Nginx be your front end. They would then transmit that over to this web application. Right. It's running a Python web server in the background. It's hosting up HTML pages, which are getting modified on the fly by Python. In this case, it doesn't even build an HTML file. It just does that based on this simple hello world. Okay. If I want this to be externally visible, right now it's on a 127.0.0.1. I would have to run Flask run -- host and then give it quad 0 so that it's available on every IP address on this laptop. If you're here on campus and you're hardwired in, that will be a public 209 address. So you are hosting a real web server every time you're lighting that up on your laptop here. Right? You don't have to do port forwarding and all that stuff like you would have to do at home. If you want this to work at home, you guys are grabbing a wireless IP address and it's DHCP. Go into your router, make sure that your laptop is always going to get that DHCP address. Go into your port forwarding section, say 5000 goes to this laptop or whatever. Then you can actually run it publicly from your house using whatever public IP you have at your house. So you could have something like IP Chicken. IP Chicken tells me what my public IP is right now, and that's the IP I would go to. Do that from your home, you get your public IP address. Okay. Debug mode, when something breaks, it's going to show it right here on the website, which is super helpful when we're actually running our application, right? So if I got something in here and I'm trying to concatenate a string and a non-type object, it's going to dump it right to the screen and tell me what line has the problem. Okay. This is like you getting the visual output in the logs. You will also get that same kind of output down here at the bottom. When you run this publicly, you obviously don't want it to crash and tell them what line of code it crashed on in the line of code, because then somebody can see the lines of code for your program. Right? Okay. Let's see. HTML. If you are looking to escape something, you just wrap that in the keyword escape. So you say from markup safe import escape. Then you can say the keyword escape name, and that would make sure that name then is set up in a way that would be displayed on the screen. So it escapes HTML characters, things like that. Okay. If you wanted it to be in like script alert bad or something like that, and you wanted it to pop up, then you could get it to do it that way. And we'll talk more about that in templates. When we work with the route command, so as you guys saw, / means that it's at the home directory, right? This will be my index page or hello or whatever. If I call it whack hello, then it runs this function and it would give me hello world. So this is how you can get multiple pages off of yours. It's as simple as saying app route, whatever name you want it to be, create the function of what you want it to do in that function and spit it out. Really, really simple. Okay. If you want to have the name of the URL dynamic, right? So say the person logged in, you want that to be their user. So it's cupcakes.com/Jason because I'm logged in as Jason. Then you can set up these here, which would be the greater than username and then less than. That would then set up escape and plug in the variable name username for whatever we're using it. Same way with this integer of a post ID or whatever you're using in here. You can see these paths. Okay. Let's see, URL binding, you can use that. These were all going to make sense when we actually go through. The last little piece I'll show you here in this quick start is the rendering templates. So if we use from Flask import render template, this is where we can use an HTML file kind of decorated the way we want. And then we could tell it to render that HTML file. So before it's just rendering text to the screen. But if I build out an HTML file, I could tell it when I go to whack hello, use hello. And when I say the word name, use the variable in my Python program of name, whatever you want it to go. Yeah.
So I don't know how deep this would go, but like, let's say that you have an HTML file that has an attached JavaScript file. If you include all the relevant files, could you still run that page, or does everything have to be in Python?
Well, so your HTML file is calling back to the JavaScript file. So you in here, you would just give it the JavaScript file. Because it would be in your script header of your HTML that it's calling those JavaScript
files. Gotcha. Okay.
But those JavaScript files would have to be served up inside of your templates or your main static folder at that point.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
And we'll go into much more depth on that. Okay. So how do we learn this? We got to have some kind of example, right? So the best way to do it is go to the tutorial, which I think I linked directly to it. However, I need to update it to the latest one. So let me do that real quick. All right. So that will link you directly to the Flask tutorial for the updated part. This Jenga templates is going to tell you a little bit more about the formatting of Jenga templates. You can use this as mostly reference. Okay. We're going to cover it all, what we need to know in here. But Jenga templates are pretty cool. You basically write out an HTML page. Say you have a bunch of data in a dictionary, right? Instead of you having to build a table, you just say TLD key value. You pass in the term of key and value, you write for whatever ever right into your Jenga template, and it spits all that out for you. So if you need to build a table with like 30 things in it, you don't have to build out a table with 30 things. You do a for loop and it automatically generates the code that's associated with that. You can also use, like at the top of every single one of your pages, you have a header or a banner, and at the bottom, you always have a footer. You can add that up as your base.html. Then extend that page to inject code into the middle of that website for that particular page. That way you're not having to, if you change the header, go back and change 13 HTML files. You have a base file, you import that as your base, and then extend from there. Okay, so for a tutorial, we're going to create a basic blog application called Flasker, right? This will allow users to register, log in, create a post, edit a post, and delete their own post. And they'll be able to package and install that on another computer if we want at the very end. Okay. So as we go through this tutorial, we can kind of see how it works. You can see some extensions that you might be able to use in your guys' final project. Okay. So we'll continue on to the project layout. And so here it wants us to create a project directory and enter it. This is going to be the one that we just created inside PyCharm. Okay. So we are in our tutorial. I just called this Flask tutorial. You can use the dash if you want to, whatever you want to do. All right. If we look at our main app code, which we can see here, this is their hello.py file. So ours by default is called app.py, right? See this default one here called app.py. we would delete that. And we want to create one called hello.py. So we go to new Python file, call it hello. And it would automatically save it as hello.py. From there, we're going to copy and paste this code in, which is honestly the same. The difference is now when I say Flask run, it automatically will pull app.py. Now I have to tell it run hello, because that's the name of this particular file. All right. As your project grows, it can get overwhelming to write all of your code into one file. Therefore, we will set up packages for that to be cascaded underneath. All right. So by the end of this project, we will have a tutorial that looks like this. Or this will be our file structure all the way through at the end. Okay. All right, we can also set up a get ignore file. This will make sure that we don't take things with us that shouldn't be, like our distribution, our virtual environment file, etc. All right. You guys can go ahead and set up this Flask tutorial to go out to your GitHub if you want to. The only thing I have in the homework is that I eventually have you guys finish the Flask tutorial. Then in the second part in week 8, you guys will submit the mini project, which is an extended version of what you guys have been doing so far. Okay. Okay. So let's go to our application setup. In this case, we're going to create an inside folder called Flasker. And this is going to be our little app within our web app. So we're going to go out here, right click, make a new folder called Flasker. Flask-R. There we go. And inside there, we want to have an init file. So underscore init underscore saves it as .py. And in that, we're going to have this very basic application that we're going to copy and paste this in. And then we'll take a look at what that actually does. That did not call it a Python file, so give me a chance to rename that. And .py. There we go. Okay, so in that file, I'm gonna move this out of the way so we can actually see something here. We import our Flask, we import OS. We're gonna have a project called create app. Okay. We have our name here that sets it up. We have our config management where we're going to set up a secret key, a database. We're going to use SQLite. So this is going to be backed by SQLite. And that'll allow us to store some variables in there. If we look at this app route, you'll notice whack hello right now just shows hello world. Okay. So if we come out here, it's going to tell you about all those pieces. In this case, this is going to allow us to set up the name of the current Python module, which in this case is Flask-R. And if we have a relevant config or an actual configuration folder, we don't have that now. Secret key allows us to set a key in our dev environment, and then a database is going to point to a SQLite database. So you don't have to have a full-blown Postgre database or a MySQL database in order to use Flask-R. We can use a simple SQLite, which in this case is a flat file that just runs alongside your program. Obviously, if you're doing hundreds and hundreds of users, thousands of users, don't use a SQLite file, right? Purposes of this class, you could do that without having to have a big management database server. All right. So to run this application, now if I hit run, you'll notice nothing works, right? Because there is no app up here at the top. So to get this to work, we would have to click down and hit edit configuration. And we would change this to not app.py, but we would change this to hello.py. Hit OK. Now if we hit run, it'll go ahead and execute our code. If we click here, you'll see we still get the same hello world. So the difference is before we had it in our main Flask tutorial folder, we are building a sub application within our web application. This one's called Flask-R, just application management within Flask. All right. You'll see things like a debugger pin pop up here. If we had debugger on, that kind of stuff, it doesn't really matter for what we see here. All right. Now, if we go out to the website, again, it's going to pull that up. Let's click on that link here. you see we get hello world. If we go to whack hello, you would see we get page not found. Now, the reason it didn't run that is because it should give us a whack hello, actually. Or is it running it native? Could be running the wrong file. Let's go down here into the terminal and run it the right way, which is using Flask -- app, Flaskr, run, and debug mode. Okay. So just copy and paste that down here to the bottom. And then at that point, now we get our debug pin that we were expecting. You come here, notice at the home site, you get no website, right? Because we had no root for our home one. We do a whack hello. We now have our website up where it belongs. Okay. Anybody got any questions so far of what we've seen? So this app file here, which in this case is our init folder, or an init file inside of Flaskr, is going to create this app. It has a root called hello world. Right now, we're just returning text. It's going to create any folders that we need by default. And if we have a test config and access to a SQLite database, connect to it. Right now, we don't have any of that. It's just boilerplate template. If we have a thing called config.py, we want to pull our configs from that. We don't have anything yet. All right. So this is going to be important. Like I said before, when we work with databases, in this case, we're going to play with SQLite 3. We have to design our database to hold the type of data that we want to hold. All right. So in this, the first thing we would do is connect and work with the SQLite database. To create a connection to it, any queries, operations are performed using that connection, and we need to close that after we gathered whatever information from that database. Most of you guys have taken a database class at some point, I would expect. So you should be able to use SQLite. So we're going to have a file called db.py. This is going to handle all of our database stuff. So we come out here, we go to our Flaskr, new Python file, db.py. And again, we copy this information in. Now, what does this information do? We're going to use the SQLite module so that we don't have to have a full-blown SQL database running in the background. We have a function called getDB, which means if DB not in G, notice that G is the connection out to the database file. Set up a name. If so, connect to it. Close, just closes it. All this is doing is setting up the precursor for us to connect to a database, run some SQL commands, pull some information back, close that connection. Lose anybody? Everybody lost?
Makes sense. About an hour ago.
All right. So now we have that up there. The G itself is just a special object. Notice G dot whatever. That's looking for the request coming through. It's just the terminology it uses. Don't have to go into super big detail. All right. How many guys have played with SQL before? All right. So you have what's called a schema file. This will automatically create our empty tables and define what we have inside that table, right? So you have all your values inside of there. So we are going to create this schema.sql file, and that will create a database file for us. So new, in this case, we're going to say file, and we'll call it schema.sql. We'll copy and paste this SQL in. All this is a bunch of SQL commands, if you guys have ever done SQL before, right? And we can say use SQLite, and that way it knows that we're using the SQLite. This is things that you would do if you ever logged into a SQL database. So we would drop the table if they already exist. This clears all of our initial data. That's all that's doing. We have two tables, a user table and a post table. If those exist, trash them. That's when we first run our application and get it up and running. Then we're going to create the user table, and we're going to have three keys in there. We're going to have the ID, which is our primary integer. Almost everything has that. We have a username and we have a password. Both of those are set to text, and that we have this unique flag on username, which means that nobody can have the same username. Everybody understand how that text is working? Okay. We have a table for post. Again, our primary key is just an ID that automatically increments. We have an author ID, which is an integer. We have a timestamp, which is at the moment we hit post, it automatically fills this in for us. We have a title, which is text. We have a body, which is text, and then a foreign key, which bounced back to the users table to show us what user made this post. If I lost anybody, say so, because it's okay. It's something that's easier to learn in Flask than Django when we get rolling.
It sounds like just kind of all your SQL stuff.
Pretty much. And not null is basically meaning that it cannot be blank, right? Or it has to have some value when we create it. So when we create a user in our users table, it has to have a username, it has to have a password. In this case, the username is unique, which means it has to be different. Somebody could use the same password, but they can't use the same username. This is the kind of stuff you have to think out of ahead of time before you build your web application. Right? You can modify and do some changes, and that's where Django comes into effect and does way better change management for that. Flask is kind of meant that you would have that organized before you started. Now, what's cool is I can come up here and click on configure data source, and this will allow us to eventually connect to our SQL database so we can run SQL commands directly against it. So if we want to check our table, that kind of stuff, we can set that up. We can't quite do that yet until we get rolling. All right, from there, we are going to specifically tell it that we want to use that schema SQL file that we just created, right? And we want to add these two commands. So we want to have the initialize database command, which will open up the SQL schema, create a file based on that schema. And we have this initialize DB command, which will echo back to us that the database was initialized. So add these two functions to your db.py. Meaning that if we go back to our db.py, we have get db, close db. At the bottom of this, we now have initialize db and initialize db command. So what the hell does this mean? This means when we run this from the command line and we run the command initialize db, we wrote this function. This function says go create those tables in a database. Right? So we save that. We come up here. Now notice when I hit Control Save here, Control S, it automatically restarts the server. You do not have to stop it.
Yeah.
All right. So every time you make changes, you hit Control S, it automatically saves it. Okay. Now, what do these mean? Open resource just means we're going to open up a file relative to the Flask folder, which is called schema SQL. We already created that, right? Right there. Boom. This has our little table information in it. And this click.command just means that from the command line, we can run the command initialize DB, and it would automatically run that for us. Real simple. All right, so now we need to register our application with the initialize DB command so that we can run it from the command line. So if we go to our DB command, we add this one called init app, and we dump that into our DB. And this just creates our initial application. Okay. Which means close the database connections, add a command and run it up. Just a way for us to initialize our database. All right. Now, if you guys look at your init file, right? Anybody remember from Python how init works? So init is the first thing that's going to run inside that folder. If I call it whatever that folder name is above it, it's going to run this init file automatically. So Python is always going to run that init file. So what this is saying, now once we get our create app, once you get past this existing code of app equals blah, 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 we need to add this part so that it will automatically initialize our application, which will now initialize our database. So we go back to our init file. We scroll down to right before it says init app, right? This is inside create app. We are inside create app. We have app equals blah, blah, blah. Right before we do this mapping, we paste this in here, which is return app. Whoops, sorry. We don't do the init app there. or the return app, it's already at the bottom.
Okay.
Does that all make sense? So it needs to go when they do this in the tutorial here. Oops. You need to when it says existing code omitted, you just need to place it at the very bottom of what that is and go through. So in this case, we wouldn't place it right here. We would place it at the very, very bottom of this row, right after our def below. Paste it in there.
Cool. Okay.
All right. From there, we need to initialize our database. So we created this command, right? Flask -- app Flaskr. That's the one we created. And we made this command called initdb, which will initialize our database, AKA create the SQLite 3 database file for us. So if we go back to our command line and we stop this, Control C, we run Flask -- app Flaskr. That's the name of our folder up here. Okay. Space init-db. And that is the command we created inside this DB. You guys remember right here, initdb, echo that command when it's ran. All right. So we hit enter. It comes back with initialize the database. If we look over here in our tutorial folder, right now nothing happened. However, if we click in here, you'll see this word called instance. And inside instance, we now have a flaskr.sql folder or a file. This we can connect to in PyCharm to see how that table looks. So if we right click and go to, actually, you don't even have to right click. Just come over here to this database, data source, and we just need to tell it what to do. So let's close this out. Double click on it. You're going to get this data source automatically set up with the right schema. All you have to do is hit test connection. This makes sure that you have a connection to that database. Hit OK. And so now we have a connection to that MySQL database. And we can run SQL commands here and do whatever. So how do you describe all your tables in SQL? Does anybody remember? You could do select, but how do you like show all your tables?
Describe. It's been a minute.
Show tables, right?
Wow.
I think SQLite is a little bit different. So we could do show tables, run, and nothing to run. Why?
Mine didn't create an instance folder.
It's not list, right? List tables.
Oh, that's it.
It is list, right?
Yeah, it's listed.
Nope, not list tables either. Wow, been a while since I've done it. Well, there you go. You get all your commands, right? Does it describe?
I think so. I thought I would have done mine. It was.
I thought so too. Obviously, I need to brush back up on my SQLite because it's been a while. But here's the cool part. You can right click on this, go to main, right? Or the server objects rather. You can click on, let's see, correlations, not what we want. Here, modules, routines, that's not what I want either. We should have. I don't think it's actually executed what we needed there yet. Okay. We got everybody lost yet?
Mine didn't create an instance.
So you ran this down here in the terminal, right?
Yes. I got the echo initialized database, but it never created the folder.
So when you click up here, you may need to refresh. So you might need to right click refresh, or sometimes it takes a little bit for PyCharm to refresh this folder structure.
Oh, yeah. Fair enough.
Cool. Okay, so we're just going to close that database connection for now. We can close this console for now.
Hey, Jason,
Yeah.
if you refresh the database on the right, the table will show up.
Let's see. This must be Adam because the voice is all goofy. Yeah, what'd you say, Adam?
So if you refresh the database on the pop out on the right, the table will show up.
Okay, okay. I was gonna say it just wasn't showing up. So let's see here. Flaskr. And if I hit this refresh button over here, there we go. There's my tables. Good call. So you'll notice in here in the tables, I now have my post table. I have my users table. If I expand those out, we can see the keys I had in there, the foreign keys that we go across, and my columns. So you guys know your columns that we created, our author ID, the created, the title, the body. We can even see what type those are. So this is handy in PyCharm. We can actually explore the database directly in PyCharm and remember how we built that out. Okay. Cool. So we now have a start. We have a database that's initialized by default. The next topic that you guys are going to work with in the tutorial here is blueprints and views. All right. So a view is a section of code that you write that responds to the request of the application. In other words, I go to jasonzeller.com, whack Zeller. That Zeller is going to be a view of my application. All right. It's a page that I'm requesting from the end server. So Flask will use a pattern to match the incoming request URL, aka /Zeller, to something that should handle it. All right. The view is going to say /Zeller equals this function. Yosemite Sam equals this function. Whatever's after the whack, that's what it's pointing for. So a view is going to return data that Flask will then turn into an outgoing response. It can also redirect things. It could generate another URL based on the name and the arguments that were passed into it. Okay. A blueprint is a way to group all of these views together as well as some code. So rather than registering views and other code directly within the application, they get a blueprint. And that blueprint is registered application when it's available with the factory function. So Flaskar, in this case, in our problem, is going to have two blueprints. We have one for authentication functions, and we have one for all the blog post functions. Sound familiar with INF601? Right? We took all of our functions out of our main stuff, put it in a separate file, imported it as a module. This is the same thing. In this web application, we're going to group together all the stuff that deals with authentication. We're going to group together all the stuff that deals with blog posts. That way, if we need to have an authentication issue, we go to the authentication Python file. If we have something that deals just with blog posts, we go to that file.
Gotcha.
Kind of make sense? Otherwise, you got one flat file, and you guys know how that worked out in 360, right? Next thing you know, you got thousands of lines of code. All right. So we are going to code each blueprint that will go in as a separate module. And since the blog needs to know about authentication, you're going to write the authentication code first. Make sense? Can't make a blog post unless you're authenticated. So we got to write the authentication code first. So we're going to write this auth.py file, and we're going to copy this code in here. Again, this should be inside of our Flaskar folder. So we right-click new Python file. We call it auth. And then we paste this in here. And I'm going to close this database for now. Okay. So all this is doing at this point, it's got some initial imports over here. We'll talk about what all that means. But we are setting up a BP value, and that's a blueprint object, which has a name of auth. It's going to use the underscore name, which just says use this as the auth blueprint. And their URL prefix is /auth. So if we go to /auth, that contains all of these modules that we write inside of here. Everybody kind of understand that? All right, we go back to our initial init.py file. We need to make sure we import all of our auth stuff before we return the original app. So we're going to copy these two lines, go back to our init, and right below where we initialize the database, we're going to register our blueprint. Still make sense so far? Maybe, sort of, kind of.
Feels like we're just kind of creating the different pieces in the
Exactly. We're creating our container, and this way they call this blueprints in Flask. In Django, it has a different name, but in Blueprint or in Flask, it's called blueprints. Now we are creating our first view, aka our first page of our website. All right. And that is going to be our register page. So we created this folder called auth, right? And off auth, we're going to create a view called register. This is the registration page of our website. So when the user visits /auth/register, the register is going to return some HTML, which is a form for them to fill out so they can register for our web application.
Okay.
Right? When they submit the form, it's going to validate that input and either show the form again with an error message of something they did, or we're going to return that and create a new user and send them to the login page. All right. So this is the code that does all of that. We're going to explain that in detail. So let's grab all this code. Come back down here. And this all goes in our auth.py. So we go to auth.py and paste this stuff in. So if we look at our route, we have our blueprint called blueprint, right? And whack register is going to get us the registration page. We're going to use this view for both get and post. Anybody remember what get and post do?
That's
Has to do with HTML, right? So if we're going to get something, that is our request to get something from the website. AKA when I go to google.com, I am sending a get in order for it to give me the web page for google.com. Right? If I fill in the search bar and I hit send, I'm now sending that page back to Google, which is a post to Google to get information with the credentials, or in this case, whatever my search term was. Google parses what I typed in the search, runs a search, executes back a get to me so that I get the page back with the results. Okay. So when we look at this function, the first thing we do is we have our def register. This is the registration page, right? And the very first thing we do is if the request method is equal to a post. So we always want to check to see if this is a post first, right? Because if we check for a get first, well, then it would never do anything with a post, right? Because it would always check the get code automatically. So the first thing we want to do is this person sending us data inside our form? That's what a get or a post does. If they are, we're going to look at a username equals whatever the request. Now, request is an object of when the user sends a form up to us, that is called a request object. And typically that will have a form, which we have in this one. And of form, we're looking for the keyword username, right? We also have a keyword in our form called password, and we're going to grab those and set them to those appropriate variable names inside Python. So username is whatever they typed in the username field. Password is whatever they typed in the password field. Everybody get that so far? The next part is DB equals get DB. Well, that's going to go create a connection to the database so that we can then create a username or create a password, right? So we have to have get DB to create that connection to the database. If there's no errors, we set that to none currently, right? That's a placeholder so that if at any point in time we get an error, submit that error there so that we can show it up on the screen. All right, if error is none, meaning that we have no errors, then we are going to try to execute db.execute, insert into the user table the username and password with the values of question mark. And after this, you submit the two variable names that you want to pass into username password. Did everybody get that? So this first one, we're taking the username they put in the username field, dumping that directly into here. However, for password, we're going to take in whatever they typed in our form and send that to the generate password hash because we don't want to store raw text passwords, right? So we're going to pass that into this generate password hash function. It will send us back an encrypted password. That is what we store in our database. We don't want to store plain text passwords in our database, right? You guys are somewhat cybersecurity guys. Even if you're not, don't do that. Okay. The next one, if that all works, we have to run db.commit to actually commit those changes to the database. So even if we say insert and do all that, but we never run commit, those changes never happen to the database. All right. If we get back a database integrity error, then we say error equals F blank username already registered. Everybody remember that username in our database had the unique field to it. which means if it finds somebody that's already registered with that, it throws an integrity error and we say that person's already registered. Right? If none of these cases matches, we redirect them to the auth login page. So they register, they click on register. If everything goes through, it puts them in the database, sends them to the login page after that. We're going to redirect them after they hit submit over to the login page. All right. The flash error here, that is going to allow it to flash on the screen that there's an error. Okay. If this is not a post request, notice this is a really long if chain, right? If it's not a post request, then we're just going to render the template out called register.html out to the user, aka register the form to them. Anybody got any questions so far?
I think only 12%, so let's kind of see it in action.
Yep. All right. So this is just explanation of what that is. The view itself will follow the pattern for register. So we need to have a login page, right? We told it to redirect to login after that database works. We're going to have to create that login section. So let's copy and paste this code. This goes down under our auth currently. So we click on our auth. At the very end of this, we hit enter. And this creates our login. So you should get this where you have your register page. Further down, you're going to have this other object to do our login.
So kind of what this is saying is like, you give it a route as in like, if the user ends up here, do this.
Yes.
Or, okay.
If they're requesting the slash login page, go to do
Okay.
this, execute.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
So if I go to google.com and just say whack, it's going to send me to the whack by default, which means it's going to look up a function. What function is associated with just a single slash?
And
If I say slash hello, okay, find out which one of these routes match slash hello, run that function for that.
so your blueprint is kind of like the map of the entire website.
Exactly.
And then you go to your .whack, whatever, it's going to look at the blueprint, go there, and then your blueprint has connections to everywhere else.
Yes.
That you then modify with routes to get there when certain things happen.
Yep. And the idea behind a blueprint is that it's a collection of all these together. So everything we're doing so far deals with authentication. So it would be jasonzeller.com/auth/register /login /whatever.
Gotcha.
So for our login page, we again use the get and post commands, right? Because we have a form on there, aka a login page. And it works very similarly. We're going to have them type in a username and password. We go to the database, find out if we can select star from user where the username equals whatever they typed in. Does anybody not know how this works with SQL? A little bit. So in a SQL command, if we want to get something from the database, we say select star or select everything from the user table where the username equals whatever the user typed in. If we get no results, then that user doesn't exist in the database. If we get a result, and we should just get one, we are going to use fetch one to fetch whatever that user typed in. All right. If the user is none, say that's an incorrect username. They didn't type one in, our database doesn't match that. If it does have a result, then we're going to use the check password function, pass in the user password that they did, and use it to pull out the password. So what is that check password user doing? It's taking the hash password out of the database. It's running the hash encoding function against the password they just typed in, checking to see if those two match. If it does, go on. If it doesn't, say there's a password incorrect. Everybody kind of see how that works? We have two functions with the password thing. One, generate a password hash. Two, check the password hash, which means given a hash, does it match it if I take in another string and hash it? All right. After that, if we have no errors based on any of that, we're going to run a session.clear, which clears our session cookies in our website. Everybody's logged into a website, right? That sets a cookie in the website that says you are logged in. So if you close that page, come back, a lot of times that session is still live. You don't have to relog back in.
Gotcha.
As long as that session cookie is still going, you're good, which is why you always clear your cookies as a cybersecurity guy, right? you don't clear your cookies, somebody else can steal your cookie or your session token, jump right into your login, never have to have your username and password. They just need your session token or cookie. Yeah, don't do that.
You learn something new every day.
This is why you guys want to be cybersecurity students, right? So this is how this falls under our cybersecurity realm, the 601 class, is because here is where I hack your guys' logins. I don't need to know your username and passwords. I just need to hijack your cookies or your session.
Cool.
All right. If we log in, everything's good, redirect them to our index URL. Make sense? You log into google.com, sends you back to google.com, says you're signed in the upper right, right? Okay. Otherwise, we're going to render them the login.html page. All right, that is the glue. This is the directions behind the scenes. It says, if we got this correct, go do this, go do that, etc. All right. Now in our auth, we need to have a function that is going to look for the user's ID and store it in a session table to see if it's available in the future. All right. So session itself is a dictionary that stores data across all the requests a user does. If the validation succeeds, the user's ID is stored in that session and the data is stored in a cookie and sent to the browser so we can store that information, right? The browser sends it back with subsequent requests. It says, here's my session cookie. This is the user that's currently logged in for me, right?
Okay.
And this securely signs in the data so that it can't be tampered with. Here's my customer's ID, sign it, send me back data, go ahead. Okay. So now that the user's ID is stored in that session cookie, it's available upon subsequent requests. At the beginning of each request, if the user is logged into their information, it should be loaded and made available to all the other views, right? So our page will look different if the user's logged in. Just like I go to google.com, if I'm not signed in, I don't see all the cool stuff at the top, right? I sign in, I get all the cool stuff at the top. That is a simple if statement. If session, AKA they're logged in, display this. If not, display this. Okay. So we want to add to our auth of whether or not we have a session ID. And this is just a function to check to make sure that the logged in user. So if I log into a website and I have a website, I need a function that says, go get the session auth ID information. Right? So we're going to add this to our auth function or to our auth page. And if you look at it, it's super simple. It passes in the user ID. We go out to our users table, go select the user where that ID matches, blah. Right. Okay. We now have a register function. We have a login function. We obviously need a log out function, right? Basic functionality. We can log in. We got to have a way to log out. So now we're going to create that log out function. Super simple. We go out to our auth.py. We create a log out session that basically clears that session cookie key, redirects them back to our main website. As long as that session's cleared, they're logged out. Okay. From that point on, then load logged in user won't load because there is no session. So let's add this to our auth. And this is on /logout. So if they go to /logout, it kills their logout session and they're done. Please tell me that was something new to you guys.
No, they're here.
Spooky. I haven't heard one of those hanging ghosts that does that sound in a long time. Okay. So you guys may have played around with what's called a decorator. All right. And a decorator is used to check this for each view that it's applied to. So what this does is we're going to have this decorator here called login required. That means you can't get to this page unless you're logged in. Right. So if we have a My Profile page, well, they should never have access to the My Profile page unless they're logged in. Why? Because we need them logged in so we can get their session ID, which gives us their user ID, so we can build the My Profile page based on the user that's logged in. I shouldn't be able to go to whack profile because one, it would crash, right? I'm not feeding it a profile. So we're going to create this profile view. or in this case, a login required decorator, which is going to check to make sure the user's logged in. If there is no session, kick them over to the login page so they can log in. It's super, super simple. So add this decorator to your auth login pie. You in there. All right. So far we've seen things like URL for, right? If we go back and look at this code, we use the redirect function to get the URL for auth.login, aka jasonzeller.com/auth/login, right? Same way with this redirect, we get that one. Render the templates, render URLs. So you'll notice in these, we're actually telling it to render a template of an HTML file, where here we're saying, go get the URL for this so we can redirect them to the right spot. Everybody understand how that works so far? Clear as mud? Again, it'll make sense once you start playing with the actual tutorial, and then we'll walk through what it did as it went through the steps. So the very next thing, we have a login, we have a log out, we have this whole auth blueprint, right? That handles our registration, login, log out. We go back and look at this. We have this auth blueprint. It handles our registration functions. It handles our login, and it handles our log out down here at the bottom. And we have some helpers here, which loads our logged in user. If they're already logged in, give us the session cookie. If this page has a requirement that they must be logged in order to get access to it, then we have a decorator for that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about templates. And this should take us in through the end of the day, at least get us a template where we can test some things, right? Okay. So a template, you've written some authentication views, but if you run the web server and try to go to those URLs, we're going to get a template not found. AKA, if I come down here and I run our Flask, our app, error missing command. Run. All right, I go out to this website, nothing. If I go out to auth, hit enter, no 404 from the found, right? We go to our login page, I get an internal server error. And that's if I go back down here, we can see template not found in our auth errors. Okay. Notice it did not give me any real error other than an internal server error up here. If I would have ran this command with --debug and hit enter, go back to the same website and hit refresh, it actually gives me that error context right on the screen, which is handy because I don't have to flip back and forth. I can see what exactly dumped on the screen. All right. So the issue is when I told it to go to login dot just whack auth login, we told it to render the template auth login.html. That file doesn't exist. That's why we're getting this error. All right. So we have a templates folder in here, right? Right here, templates. And inside this templates folder, we need to have some basic HTML files in order to pull templates from. Well, again, what's really nice with Jenga is it behaves mostly like a Python file. All right. If we use our special delimiters, which are double curly braces, anything that's inside that double curly brace is going to act like straight up Python code. So if I say for X and X, or you know what I mean, for X in this list, it's going to loop through just like it's Python. It's really, really slick to do that. If we want to do if statements, we need to use a curly brace and a percentage sign. So this would be like curly brace, percentage sign, if, right? And then we do an if statement and go on through. So we can run a bunch of Python code inside of it. All right. So this is going to be our basic HTML page. This is going to set up our header, our footer, but nothing in the middle. Okay. So how does that actually work? Well, let's grab this base.html file. And we'll copy and paste that into our templates. So we go to templates, and this needs to be a templates folder inside of Flask, not this outside templates folder.
Okay.
Okay. So we go to Flask, we right click, new directory called templates. And inside this templates folder, we're doing a new HTML file called base. All right, we copy and paste all this in here. Whoops, do all of this. Feel like that got off. Let's try that again. Take that out, delete it, paste it. Okay. So notice this doesn't truly follow most HTML syntax code, right? Because we're creating some extra blocks for ourselves. So HTML, super basic. We have a title at the top. We have our links, which go out to all our style sheets. We have a nav bar, which is just a nav section, right? We call this section content, and we have some basic content here. The reason that we give it these names is so that later our other HTML files, we just say content, it injects the content into that section. Or if we want to inject this into the head, we inject it into the head. It's beautiful because we don't have to build out full-blown HTML pages for every single page. We build out a boilerplate template, add in the little data that we want. Then we're not having to change massive lines of code every time we make a tweak.
Yeah.
Right? So we create this little code here, which says block title in block. That means that when I say block inside of another HTML file, it dumps that code right in there. Dash Flask, this all gets stuck in the title field. This all here, we can get the URL for our static files, go find my style.css, which we'll need to create. This creates a basic web page with a header at the top, says Flask. If users logged in, present a line that says username, log out. It's creating our form, right? Come down here, we see our form. All right. We got our basic title. We talked about that. Now we need to create our register HTML page. So let's copy that. Go out here and create a register. Copy all this, paste this in. So what does this do? Notice we have this keyword at the top that says extends base HTML, AKA take everything that's in base HTML, dump that code right into here. For the block of header, we want to inject the title of register. We're putting the title of this page as register. In the block of content, we want to create our form. This is our login form. Username, password, double check our password, make sure they're doing it right, that kind of stuff. Simple HTML form. We put in block, we now have a registration page. All right. We need a login page. So let's copy and paste that one in. HTML, login. And I know this is dense. This is why it goes over 2 weeks, guys. I got to get to a working example so you guys can understand what's really going on.
I forgot. Is there a quiz in a project due this weekend?
No.
Okay, I didn't think
Nope,
so. But
that's next week. That's why I say these, like Flask, we're going to spend 2 weeks on, then we're going to spend, I think, 3 weeks on Django or something like that, because there's a lot to cover as to what that is. The goal right now is to get you to this tutorial so we can see what's happening. Okay.
The project that's gonna be due next week is it's building off this, right?
No, it will be your own Flask project, but you can use this as a boilerplate template. You know what I mean? Tweak your names, tweak your codes, always reuse code, always reuse code. Unless you are a sadist and you like to do things from scratch, you're more than welcome to do that. But it helps to have boilerplate code. Okay. This last one we created was our login page. Again, it looks very similar to the register page, only the button says log me in. The other page says register, right?
Yeah.
On the back end, it does two totally different things. Register is going to see if you're in the database. If you are, then it says you got it already logged in, etc. Templates are super basic right now. All right. We have this up. We can now go ahead and run our page. So let's close this, run this again. And now, if we go out to our login page, which is auth/register, actually, we get this template and we have no auth register. Well, what I type in wrong. I probably put it in the wrong folder structure. Give me a second. Yes, I did. So because these pages are dealing with our auth blueprint, we have to have a subfolder in Flask called auth. Auth. And move these three up there. There you go.
It's,
So your folder structure should go Flaskar, templates, auth, and then our base, login, and register.
So auth, okay, so base, login, and register, all three in auth.
In auth, yep. Which makes sense, right? Those are all pages that are just dealing with authentication. All right, so now if I come back out here and refresh on our register. Let's see here, base template not found. I might need to restart it here.
It's not letting me move to it.
It'll ask if you want to refactor, just say yes. So here we go to auth/register. Still doesn't like base.
Base is supposed to be in the root of the template folder.
Supposed to be in what?
The root of the template folder.
It was telling us to actually go deeper than that. So Flaskar, templates, auth, there.
Right, that was, but base was at the root.
Oh yeah, base is in basic. Yep. You're right. So we go up here and put that in.
So this
Okay.
Goes up in templates.
Yep. So you have Flaskar, templates, auth. Inside auth is login and register. Base is just in the templates folder itself. Good catch. Which makes complete sense, right? Base is the basic for no matter what our files are. Auth is just dealing with those two auth pages. Now I hit refresh. And yay, we have this super fancy web app. All right. It's not, right? But we can style it with CSS and we can do some fancy stuff, which is actually what you would do next. So right now it's some very basic HTML. If we look at the code, inspect, we look at this page. Let's look in the head. In the head, notice this title is register space dash Flaskar, right? If we go back to our code for this auth register page, notice at the top, we have this block title register is all we're adding. What is it adding? If we go back to our base, notice, go back up here in our block, we have our, whatever we send in this block, whoops, I don't want to do that. Goes here, space dash Flaskar. That's how it built that title for us. Does everybody kind of see where that came from? So in our basic, we say, if we pass anything in a title, it gets dropped into here, and then space dash Flaskar after that. In our register page, we said in that block title, put the word register in there, which means when it got registered out here on the website, it became register space dash Flaskar. In this style sheet, this gives us style.css, right? If we go out to our base, here's where that came from. Comes from our base HTML file. Now notice we don't have anything, that's why nothing's styled right now. Look at our static folder, there is no style.csv or CSS. This base gives us our Flaskar and it gives us our HTML code and whatever's in our header and block down here. If we look over here, we go and look in our body of our HTML code. In our section called content, we have a header that says register, right? Then from here, we have our form, which is going to do username and password, and it built this HTML for us based off this register and do. Super, super simple, basic HTML stuff.
For some reason, mine's not pulling up any of my pages.
Okay,
I have the 5000/auth/login, and it just says 404. Login and register both do that.
on your bottom of pie charm, what error are you getting down here?
404. It just says -447. Okay, honestly, same as yours, except it's red.
Did you copy and paste those into the auth up here when we built those out?
The auth. I have BP before app request, log out. I have log in. I have register.
And these are all in your hello.py out here.
Yeah. Well, maybe not. Oh, so I had to have app.route for those in HelloPy as well.
No, I'm just saying you have Hello Pi and then
Yeah.
you have all of this in your
Yeah.
auth.py, which is inside your Flask.r folder.
Mm-hmm. That's okay.
It's probably a file structure thing. It's
Yeah.
usually what it ends up being.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, so now we have this website. If we go out to register, we get the register page. If I click this link for login, it sends me to the login page. Notice the only thing that changes is the text here and the button text. Right? These two pages look identical to each other. But they perform two separate things. So register and my username, let's use my name, JL Zeller, password 12345. We hit register. The moment I hit register, let's go look at what happened down here in Python. It sent a post request to register. All right, so let's go look at register. If request is post, which it was, we want to take the username from the form, the password from the form, and set those as these two variables. Then we made a connection to the database. If that user doesn't exist, or if there is no username, we say username is required, right? If they didn't give us a password, we say password is required. If there's no error, we insert that username into the database. If we got an error, that means that the username was already registered. So now if I go out here to my database, which remember is under instance and Flask.r, and we look under our tables of users, right? Notice how my username got put in here, and the password, notice, is encrypted. It's encrypted in script. So this happened from us running that function called generate password hash, which gets imported from this security package module, right? And it's generating a password hash based off the script encoding. And that's what we're storing in our database,
Is there any way
not
to-
an MD5 hash.
Is there any way to decrypt that, like whatsoever? Just
For script, we could look into our check password hash function, right? And so if we double click this, which actually it's hold control and click. Yeah. If you hold control and click on that function, it will go into the module that it came from and tell you that function. So from here, we pass it a hash and a password, and it decodes that and folds that out and see if that's the same. So here it's going to try our method, our salt, and whatever we're sending it with. And then it's going to run this compare digest between the two to see if they match. Which in this case, it doesn't decode it. It takes that hash, it re-encrypts whatever I typed in to see if it matches that hash and checks the two hashes. It does not decode and check the passwords together. We never want to go that direction. It's kind of a one-way hash, so to speak. Okay. All right, we registered. If we look in our database over here, like I showed you before, JL Zeller is now in there with a password that's been encrypted. This super long password is the equivalent of the text version of 12345. If I run it again, it will be different because I salted this password when I hashed it. So there's no way for you to take this and decrypt it unless you take that, pass it through John the Ripper, and run a big scripting engine and then start spitting out a bunch of stuff, right? I'd have to do either a dictionary-based attack in order to find it, or if I did brute force, it could take a long time, even to find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Now that I'm in here, it kicked me back to my login page. So let's go here. If I use my username JL Zeller, I type in ASDF for the password and hit login. In that split second it came back, it sent a post to our auth.login page, right? So let's go to our login code. In login, it did the post section. It took our username, our password, opened up a connection to the database, said select the user that matches whatever the username is, gathered the password from it, took the password, hashed it, went out to the database, got the hash of that password, compared those two hashes. In this case, it didn't match, and therefore we told it when it didn't match to display incorrect username here. Now, obviously, this isn't cute and fancy and has a blue pop-up or something, but we add that, right? Get the basic functionality to work, then make it pretty. So we'll try this again with the right one. Hit enter, and boom. Now it's going to come up and says, could not build the URL for index. That's because we never built the basic index page, right? So, but at this point, we are logged in and we have a session cookie in our system that tells us what that session cookie is. So if we right click here and inspect our source and we go up to our network up here at the top, we should be able to get our cookie, which I will refresh this page. And I should get the same error. We have this login here. We have our script that it's trying to pull that from. If we go to our console, which is here, right, we get this internal server error. What am I looking for here? That's not what I want. Sources. There we go. And let's go back to this login page, type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Make sure I got my debug console open, hit login. We can actually watch that traffic and how that works going across there, right? So if I look at my login, I double click that. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. Headers, payload. Everybody see my payload? What's the problem there? Right, I can see it because I am building a website right now that is HTTP. Everything's in clear text. So when I hit submit, it's going to my database, but I'm sending clear text of JL Zeller. I'm sending clear text of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is where we build stronger web applications later that instead of sending that clear text, we use things like JavaScript to encrypt it right there in the browser, then send that encryption to the server. That way we're never sending clear text passwords back to the server. Because if I'm sniffing the network right now, I can see that pop right up.
Gotcha.
But this is showing the form data that I'm gathering from my user and submitting on it. Right? We can see our payload, we can see our responses. You can basically get all your logins and all that kind of stuff right out of here. We can look at our cookies and see what's going on in here too. So if I look at my cookies, let's see, settings, right? And my cookies, where's my cookies? It's been so long since I went and looked at cookies and not just trashed them. Privacy and security, right? Third-party cookies. We come down here. Where's it have my stored cookies? See all sites and permissions. And we want to go to my 127 address. So 127.0.0.1. All right, there's our cookie. We click on the cookie. And we can see the usage information, what permissions it has access to on our system, etc. We want to drill in and see that permissions for that cookie. We could see that. So this one here, that just takes us in there. Okay. We have 525 kilobytes of data that's being stored in that cookie. Right now, all it's actually storing is our session ID, which is probably a big hash at this point. Cool. All right. That gets us our basic layout, the logins, how we go in. The next thing we're going to do is go modify some CSS and make it pretty. So we will pick up with that on Tuesday.
Gotcha.
I will stop this recording.